Hop tests are widely used in ACL rehab, but are they really telling you what you need to know? In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down what the potential challenges are with using hop tests only and what you can do about it. The problem with hop tests being used only and not using other tests as well is that they measure limb symmetry index, essentially the difference between your left and your right side. Now, although this can be helpful and it addresses imbalances, which we know are massively important in ACL rehab, what they don't show is the difference pre and post injury in terms of the number themselves. So let's say, for example, you were to achieve 1.5 meters on your left and 1.5 meters on your right. That could be really good. That could be, very, very little asymmetry, zero asymmetry, in fact. But what it won't show is that actually your scores are way down from pre-injury, and they might also be really, really down compared to normative data. And this is something called the two flat tires analogy. Just because both legs appear to be performing well and similarly doesn't mean they're actually performing well compared to your own benchmarks and known normative values for your demographic and age group. It's like saying that your two front tires on your car are fine because although they are both flat, they're both running at the same function. The truth is actually the car is going to be performing very, very poorly, going to be massively inefficient, it's probably going to have some sort of tire blowout in the future. And so although they appear to be very, very similar, they're actually both not performing well. And the challenge here is that low performance on the scores can actually show up as really, really good scores in terms of limb symmetry index. Again, let's say that you've achieved two very, very similar scores, maybe 1.5 meters and 1.6 meters would be very, very similar, but compared to your pre-injury scores or compared to normative values for your age and demographic, actually those scores are really, really low and actually suggest that your body is functioning at a poor level. Now, the problem is that most athletes don't really know what their pre-injury scores were, and without a baseline, you can't really tell how far you've actually recovered. So you might score 90% limb symmetry index, and that would be within that 10% ratio between left and right side, but you might still be 30% down compared to pre-injury levels. So you might be able to achieve really, really similar scores, but again, the scores themselves might be way down based on what you're actually capable of. Now, why this happens is very simply your body is going to try and protect itself during the recovery phase to stop you being able to produce maximal forces. So it's going to reduce the neuromuscular drive going to certain muscle groups, for example, the quadriceps. Secondly, you're probably going to experience atrophy, so there's actually less force potential in the muscle itself. And then thirdly, you've probably been undertraining that muscle group because you've been in recovery and you haven't quite got to the full function just yet. So with all those factors at play, you might be able to score similarly on your left and your right side, but actually the scores themselves are down and your body's still not functioning anywhere near where it should be. And so that's a major red flag for injury. Another issue with hops is that they're kind of only tested during rehab, and they're not really a score that you're doing on a week-to-week basis. It's just kind of an arbitrary assessment of someone's hop ability, and that's just used as a marker of readiness. Whereas in reality, if it's something that's measured consistently throughout the season, that's probably going to have a higher amount of reliability, and it's going to be a score that's actually got a higher level of performance relevance than something which is somewhat arbitrary compared to something like maximal strength, which might be being measured and tested every single week. Now, maximal strength is actually more important in many ways. The reason for this is that, one, you're probably going to know what your strength scores were prior to injury. Two, it's much easier to understand what that value is relative to normative value. So, for example, you might have 95% limb symmetry index on a single leg press, but actually you're only achieving 1.2 times body weight. Well, we know that's way off what we need to have achieved to get anywhere near things like a return to running and certainly a return to sport. Whereas strength is an underpinning physical quality that determines the rate of force development, your total power expression, your stability, your injury risk, and all of those factors. It's a massively, massively important physical quality. So actually making sure someone is hugely strong is going to have a much higher utility than just making sure they can hop the same amount of distance on both legs. Now, it's not to say that hops don't have value. I think they're still important. I still use them, but it's one of a number of tests taken in context. So for example, you could have scored really well on limb symmetry index, but if you know your maximal strength's way down, then obviously there's a major issue there. You've got to get really, really strong to give you that foundation of strength before worrying about other assessments. So hops, for example, they're actually an output. They're not necessarily a measure of physical quality. They're a combination of things. They're a combination of your stability at certain joints. They're a combination of your force expression and a number of different things that kind of almost like a hybrid assessment, really. They're not measuring any one particular thing. So they have functional utility. They have functional value because you can see how someone's landing. You can see how they're taking off. You can see their confidence in doing so. You can see the difference in left and right side. And you can obviously measure the scores themselves. They can have a lot of value, but not if they're used in isolation, because we're only going to be focused on that difference, and that difference can mask the lack of force underpinning that. Now, normative data matters, and your performance should be measured compared to what's normal for your sport and for you, your age, and your level of performance. As I've already alluded to, things like single leg press, typically 1.5 to 2 times body weight single leg press strength would be a requirement for returning to running and return to sport eventually. In a back squat, certainly above 1.5 times body weight would be a kind of normative value for a number of different age groups and demographics. But again, it depends on your age. If you're a younger athlete, that might not be appropriate. But that's why it's so important to have these normative values, because without them, we don't know what we're aiming for. And again, as we've said, it can kind of mask these issues if we're only measuring difference between left and right side. It also gives kind of false confidence, because if you're looking only at symmetry or averages, and if you're looking at a 10% difference being a threshold for return to sport, for example, it's essentially just giving you false hope, false confidence that you're actually ready. What you need to have done is to have measured those hop scores, but also to have measured your max strength, also to have measured your psychological confidence, also to have measured your capacity of certain muscle groups, particularly the calf, quad, hamstring, adductor muscle group, trunk capacity, things like that. Your range of motion, massively important. Again, that's much more important in the earlier stage of trying to get a full range of motion back. But certainly as we're thinking about returning to sport, if you're only using some kind of asymmetry measure, it's going to mask a lot of issues underneath that. So if you are measuring only hop-based testing, and you are going through the ACL rehab process, you are missing key information that's going to give you the kind of key to getting back to sport fundamentally. One of those key things I've mentioned is maximal strength. Another key thing is psychological readiness. Another key thing is capacity. Another thing is actually having the movement control and quality to do the movements that cause the injury in the first place, whether that's a cutting-based movement, pivoting, landing. Having full athletic competence in those movements is going to be hugely, hugely important as well. And just to kind of round this off, it's not to say hops aren't important at all. They do have value, as I've said. They can be important for measuring asymmetry and landing control and things like that. But they need to be one part of a holistic approach to getting an athlete ready. And so if you are an athlete getting back from an ACL tear, then just be mindful of the fact that you can't just hope that that is going to give you the answer to getting back to sport. You need to have a whole battery of testing. So when I work with clients, for example, yes, I will do hop testing, but also we're going to be measuring maximal strength, we're measuring capacity, we're going to be measuring range of motion, we're going to be measuring psychological readiness. And most importantly of all, really underpinning all of that is the movement quality. So are you actually doing those movements really, really well? Because although something like a back squat, double body weight strength, for example, might be a target, if you're not moving well fundamentally, then it is still going to have that risk of every injury in the future. So just take that as a holistic message. You need to have all these factors when you're going through that ACL rehab process.